For more, we are joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. In Southampton, we are joined by Mr. Mike Bastin, Senior Teaching Fellow at the University of Southampton. In Washington, D.C., we are joined by Mr. Nicholas Lardy, Anthony Solomon Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. What do you make of it? I mean, eventually, RMB become part of the basket. It is happening on October the 1st. Mr. Lardy.
I think it's a very important step forward in China's domestic financial reform, because to have the RMB included in the SDR basket, the Chinese financial system had to have a number of adjustments: more liberalization of the exchange rate, liberalization of interest rates, providing access to foreign investors to the interbank domestic bond market. These are all extremely important reforms related to the domestic economy. So the way I look at the inclusion of the RMB in the SDR basket, it's really the domestic reforms that were necessary for the IMF to approve the RMB inclusion. That's really the most important thing to keep in mind, in my opinion.
Professor Liu, what do you think? China's perspective?
I think it's a milestone step forward because a couple of years ago, China's application for the inclusion was really rejected, and now that it is approved, it shows that China has made substantial progress in converging more to the IMF or global standard in the liberalization of the Chinese financial market, not only in the management but also in the operational side. So I think that can really back push China. People compare China's assertion to WTO and how much impact it can create on China. So now the inclusion can also create a huge impact to push China to further reform its financial policy and also to open more to the global financial services.
Professor Bastin, of course, people would compare that to WTO, but many would say it is very different, and the significance of it is also very different when it comes to the degree. Do you agree?
I think I do. I think it's very significant for the main reason that more RMB will be freely available. The Chinese currency will be recognized as a genuine international currency for international payment transactions. So what's really most significant here is just how opportunistic and how eager the Chinese business community are to expand even more successfully internationally as a result of this, the opportunities that this will bring. I think that's what really needs to be discussed here. At a microeconomic level, it's the Chinese business community and their how well equipped they are and how much they can capitalize on what I foresee as a real major boost to their international market opportunities.
But 10.92% of the overall foreign exchange basket of the IMF. Mr. Lardy, how much difference will that really make for the Chinese businesses starting from October the 1st?
Well, I think we have to recognize that the RMB has been increasingly used in international transactions and trade over the last several years. So a currency does not have to be in the SDR basket for traders on both sides to agree to carry out their transactions in a particular currency. I mean, for example, the Canadian dollar is not in the basket, but there's plenty of trade that's carried out between Canada and other countries that's denominated in Canadian dollars. So the denomination of trade transactions really can proceed somewhat independently from the whether or not a currency is included in the basket or not. At the margin, it may help, but we've learned over the last few years that one of the major factors influencing the use of the RMB is the expectations of both Chinese importers and Chinese exporters, what's going to happen to the value of the RMB over time. In other words, if you're a foreign exporter into China, you're very happy to get paid in RMB if you think it's going to be an appreciating currency. On the other hand, if you think it's going to be a depreciating currency, you will be quite reluctant to accept payment in RMB. So the use of the RMB in trade is influenced by quite a number of factors, and whether or not it's in the SDR basket, I would say, is secondary.
Interesting. Professor Liu?
Yeah, I think of course, having said all those important significance over a long-term basis over the macro level, but on the micro level, eligibility does not really lead to popularity in a way that, with inclusion into the SDR, Chinese RMB is more eligible for as a reserve currency or as the currency for settlement. But its popularity needs to be earned over the liquidity, over the Chinese continued export drive and people's demand, and particularly how stable and transparent the Chinese financial policy will remain after the commitment to the SDR basket.
Right. It seems that Professor Bastin, the other two gentlemen have very different views from you, at least as to how much the Chinese businesses can really cash in.
Yes, and I think it really is, it's an intangible factor that needs to be discussed. It's not easy to measure. It really depends on the interpretation of Chinese business leaders, maybe across industries, and how they feel about it. And I think it also needs to be said that whilst this weighting stands at 10, I think it's 10.92%, China's quota, the maximum amount of funds stands at only 4%, and its voting power at only 3.8%, whereas the US, the quota I think 17.7, the voting power 16 point something percent. So the influence that China will have, again, is not reflected in that weighting. But again, I come back to the point that we need to see and we need to measure just how Chinese business react to this, and hopefully gain in self-belief and confidence, and realize that the international opportunity is there now because their currency is recognized as one of the 5 most important.
Is there a danger of over-optimism, Professor Liu?
Well, I do not think so, given that China still maintains the largest creditor around the world, and we have the continued trade surplus, and right now we are still at the beginning stage of mapping out our global strategy to internationalize the RMB, with more offshore centers, swapping agreements signed, etc. So I think with the endorsement of IMF, the most influential global financial institution, and so China does not only have a better say in the reform in the international financial market, but more importantly, it really gives more confidence for all investors and traders to use the RMB, and Chinese companies in particular, because they feel that they really have more of the transaction advantage in terms of a cost calculation.
Right. It is not just China with the inclusion of the RMB into the SDR basket, in a way indicating itself has graduated from the previous stage of opening up financially to the next one. It is also the IMF trying to justify itself in terms of the degree of reform and the inclusiveness it has become. Having said that, though, let me ask you, Mr. Lardy, as we all know, it's not just about the financial issues, it's also political issues. In your country, presidential campaigns going on, debate between the two candidates. One indicated China is quote-unquote still the currency manipulator. Certainly the other do not necessarily agree. Obama administration has never said that in its history either. So will currency issue, particularly China's RMB, continue to be a political issue? What would that mean with the good news that the RMB included in the SDR basket? RMB is becoming, and Chinese financial system becoming more transparent. How should we reconcile these two different stories, Mr. Lardy?
Well, I think, quite frankly, that the SDR is a pretty obscure topic. Most people in, I would say, virtually every country have never even heard of the SDR. And the fact that the RMB is included now in the SDR basket is not a major issue, is certainly in the U.S. campaign. I can't imagine anybody bringing it up. Yes, there's a lot of criticism of China's trade practices, especially by some of the candidates. I don't think all of it is very well informed, but I don't think this issue of the RMB coming into the SDR basket will become a political issue. And I don't think it was a political issue for the IMF itself. They went through a very thorough and strenuous review to determine that the RMB. Remember, their standard is the RMB has to be freely usable, which is not the same thing as saying it's 100% convertible on all transactions. It has to be freely usable in international transactions.
Right.
And after a long examination, they came to the view that it was freely usable, but they did indicate that China should take some additional steps. China did that, and then they finally voted to allow the RMB into the basket effective on October 1st.
I see. People see it very differently, of course, in different economies. It also has a lot to do with how well informed they are and whether they value the current so-called international system, to what degree, and how much it has to do with their own economy. So, Professor, let me ask you here in Beijing, what do you think? Will Chinese RMB coming into the SDR basket of the IMF and the discussions related to it as to why the RMB could become part of it into the IMF SDR basket be able to help the discussion from Chinese perspective about so-called unfair accusations from others of China being, quote unquote, the currency manipulator? Certainly one of the accusations came from the presidential debate in the United States. Well, people can just brush it off, saying not necessarily so. But at the same time, how is that going to interact with these kind of things? One is more financial, the other, of course, is more political.
Yes, I think, China is making a decision that, okay, on one hand, we maintain our autonomy in monetary policy. On the other, we want the Chinese RMB to be more liberalized and convertible on the global marketplace. And there has been a number of attempts to accelerate the liberalization of RMB in its capital account. But given the volatile situation of the global financial marketplace, China really delayed this. But the direction has never changed so far. And also China will, why do we compare with the assertion to WTO? It's not really the high significance in terms of the, the global assertion, but rather more it is a similar equation to back push China to accelerate its financial reform, because even the domestic investors and traders, they are also eager to see that we see more liberalization to reduce their uncertainty in their business decision making. Now that with the free trade zones now spreading, so we hope that this can really be rolled out together with the drive of the commitment to the inclusion of the basket.
Mr. Bastin, what do you make of China's RMB and the direction it is heading for? There has been devaluation of currencies worldwide in order to seek an edge and advantage in international trade and exports. How has China's RMB been doing so far, and the attitude coming from Chinese central bank? What do you make of all the latest development?
I think in general, and this is consistent with the central government's almost renewal of the Chinese economy, more modern economy where Chinese companies are competing on quality, on premium brand, emotional brand image, that they are very, very concerned that the currency is not used as it perhaps has been as a weapon in cost advantage and price competitiveness. So I think the direction that we'll see is a very carefully managed currency exchange rate, but I don't think we'll see dramatic depreciation and the maintenance of a currency exchange rate, the RMB with the other major currencies that gives Chinese companies automatic cost advantage. I think they've realized that in the long term is not a good thing, and Chinese companies need to stand on their own 2 feet and compete on quality, investment, and that's the way I see the currency going.
But Mr. Lardy, it is a very widely practiced method these days for economy to devalue their currency. So what do you make of this trend? And what do you make of this trend at the same time the Chinese is trying to, at least at this moment, stabilize its exchange rate system?
Well, there has been some very modest appreciation of the currency, both against the dollar and on a trade-weighted basis over the past year, but it's been quite modest, and I certainly agree that the government is not using currency depreciation as a method for boosting its exports. And I think, quite frankly, one of the reasons is China's exports are doing very well relative to the rest of the world. Yes, they're not growing very rapidly, but global export growth has slowed down dramatically. So we saw in 2015, for example, that China's share of global exports increased quite significantly. So we're in a different global environment now where trade is growing much more slowly, but China's trade is holding up very well as a share of global trade. It's even actually expanding. So there's no real economic rationale at the current situation to try to use depreciation to boost up the exports. I think China's gaining market share globally based on productivity, quality improvements, and so forth.
I see. Professor Liu, what's next? I mean, okay, as China may believe SDR basket can be a big issue, particularly to boost the morale here in this country as to more transparent we are getting. But at the same time, what about the financial reform?
With the supply side reform, and together, the financial market and financial regime will have to reform, and it is really placed on the top agenda. So the inclusion of the into the SDR market is just the beginning of the trigger to back push China, and now we have widened the corridor for fluctuation, and so we are aiming at further liberalizing the Chinese currency, and devaluation, the sort of deregulation is a ongoing process that is definitely going to happen in China.
And what about you, Mr. Bastin? What's next? What do you think might be the biggest obstacles for China to further push its own financial reform, more transparency, and putting the country more on a market economy footing?
Again, I come back to the microeconomy, and I think that the central government will be monitoring very closely the further expansion, the international expansion of Chinese companies and the building of their corporate brands, their product brands, so the likes of Huawei, Lenovo, and I think we'll see more and more, and how successful they are on the international marketplace and the influence that will have on mainland Chinese companies' business culture, and if they're convinced that that really is changing, and I think it is, then we will see further liberalization and a far more comfortable approach to allowing the currency to find its own level according to market principles, knowing that Chinese companies can compete not just on price, but on quality and premium branding. So I think, again, that's the key, the international performance of Chinese companies.
Mike Bastin, Liu Baocheng, thank you so much for being with us. And also our appreciation to Nicholas Lardy, who joined our program earlier. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us.